I was 24 when this happened, around the middle of July, 3 summers ago. At the time, I was renting this small one-story house on the edge of town. It wasn't isolated exactly, but it sat farther back from the road than the other houses around it. There were trees lining both sides of the property, and at night the place got unbelievably dark, the kind of dark where your porch light barely touched the driveway. I actually liked it because it was quiet. The house itself was old, creaky floors, thin walls, window AC unit that rattled all night. Nothing fancy. I worked long shifts loading trucks at a warehouse, so most nights I'd come home exhausted, microwave something cheap, play games for an hour, then sleep. That night started completely normal. It had been brutally hot all day. Even after midnight, the air outside still felt thick and humid. My AC was struggling, so I had my front windows cracked open a little to let air move through the house. I remember I was sitting in my living room in gym shorts watching random YouTube videos when I noticed someone walking slowly down the road outside. At first I didn't think much of it. People cut through the neighborhood sometimes. But what caught my attention was how slow he was moving. He kept stopping, not like checking directions or looking at his phone. He'd just stop completely. Then walk again. I only noticed because my TV reflected the front window behind me. Every few seconds I'd catch this dark figure in the reflection getting closer. Eventually he stopped near my mailbox, then just stood there. I muted the TV and listened. Nothing, no phone call, no car, no movement, just this guy standing near the road in the middle of the night. I remember feeling that little instinctive discomfort people get when something doesn't look right, but I kept trying to rationalize it. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe lost. After maybe 2 minutes, he started walking up my driveway. That immediately put me on edge. I got up and locked the front door, which honestly sounds stupid because I usually kept it unlocked when I was home back then. Before he reached the porch, he called out, "Hey man." His voice sounded tired. Dry. I cracked the door but left the chain on. The guy looked maybe mid-30s. Thin, sweaty. He had this faded grey hoodie tied around his waist even though it was insanely hot outside. He asked if I knew where the nearest gas station was because his phone died and he'd been walking for hours. I told him it was about 2 miles down the main road. Then he asked if he could come inside for a minute and charge his phone. That's the part one keep replaying in my head because everything after that came from one stupid decision. I should have said no, but he looked exhausted, and honestly I felt bad for him. I let him in. The second he stepped inside, I noticed this smell. Not alcohol exactly. More like sweat and wet clothes left sitting too long. He kept thanking me over and over while I plugged his phone charger into the wall near the kitchen. At first things seemed fine. He stood there quietly while his phone charged. I even offered him water. But after a few minutes, little things started feeling off. I realized he wasn't really looking at me when we talked. He was looking around the house. Not casually either. His eyes kept drifting down the hallway toward my bedroom, then toward the back door, then at the windows, like he was mentally mapping the place. I tried making small talk, asking where he was headed, but his answers were weirdly vague. Just trying to get somewhere safe. That was basically all he'd say. At one point I noticed he still hadn't turned his phone on even though it had been charging for a while. The screen stayed black. I said, "Phone still dead?" He looked at me for a second too long before saying, "Yeah." Something about the pause bothered me. Then I realized his phone wasn't even plugged in anymore. The charger had fallen halfway out of the wall. He never noticed because he never actually cared about charging it. That's when I started wanting him out of my house. I told him I had work early and needed to sleep. He nodded slowly. But he didn't move, just stood there. The silence started stretching. I remember hearing the AC rattle in the window and this ticking sound from my kitchen clock. Then he asked, "You live here alone?" That question hit me wrong immediately. I lied and said my cousin was asleep in the back room. He stared at the hallway again, then smiled a little. Not friendly, more like he knew I was lying. I didn't hear anybody. I laughed awkwardly and said, "Heavy sleeper." Another long silence. Then finally he grabbed his phone and headed for the door. The relief I felt was immediate. I locked the door the second he stepped outside. I watched him from the window expecting him to leave down the driveway. Instead, He stopped at the edge of my porch, and just stood there again. I couldn't see his face clearly anymore because of the porch light behind him, but I could see he wasn't moving. After maybe 30 seconds, he slowly turned his head toward the side of the house, toward my bedroom window. Then he walked off into the dark. I stayed awake another hour after that. I checked the locks twice, turned off the TV, and finally went to bed around 2 a.m. My bedroom was at the back of the house facing the trees. I remember lying there trying to convince myself I was overreacting. Then I heard footsteps outside the window. Slow, crunching through the gravel beside the house. I froze instantly. The footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom window. No knocking, no talking, just silence. I stared at the blinds for what felt like forever. Then, a soft scraping sound, like fingers dragging across the screen. I grabbed my phone and stayed completely still. The smart thing would have been calling police immediately, but part of me still kept trying to downplay it in my head. I thought maybe if I ignored him he'd leave. Then the doorknob at the back of the house started moving. Slowly, very gently. I sat up immediately. The sound stopped. A few seconds later, I heard movement in the hallway, inside the house. To this day, I still don't know if I forgot to lock the back door or if he forced it open somehow, but hearing those floorboards creak outside my bedroom honestly felt unreal. Like my brain couldn't process how fast things had escalated. I remember my entire body going cold. The hallway stayed silent for a few seconds. Then I saw a shadow pass underneath my bedroom door. Whoever it was stood there without moving. I could hear breathing. Very faint. I backed away from the bed as quietly as I could and grabbed the metal baseball, but I kept near the closet. Then the doorknob slowly turned. Not violently. Carefully, like he was trying not to make noise. The door opened maybe an inch before stopping against a laundry basket I had near it, and through that tiny opening, I saw part of his face. One eye. Just staring into the room. I don't think I've ever felt fear like that before. Not yelling fear, not panic. Just this horrible understanding that this person had probably been studying the house the entire time he was inside earlier. Learning where everything was. Learning where I slept. I shouted something, I don't even remember what, and slammed the bat against the door as hard as I could. The guy immediately shoved the door open. I caught a full glimpse of him then. His expression looked completely empty. Not angry, not emotional at all. That somehow made it worse. He lunged toward me and I swung the bat again, hitting his shoulder or arm. He stumbled into the wall, and I bolted past him down the hallway barefoot. I remember hearing him coming after me immediately. Fast. Way faster than I expected. I got to the kitchen and slipped on the floor because of condensation from the AC. I genuinely thought he was going to grab me right there, but I managed to get up, unlocked the front door, and ran outside. I didn't even take my phone. I sprinted straight across the road to my neighbor's house screaming for help. When we came back out a few minutes later with his shotgun, the man was gone. My back door was wide open. Nothing had been stolen. Police searched the area for hours and never found him. But the part that still bothers me happened afterward. An officer asked me to check if anything seemed moved around in the house. At first I said no. Then I noticed my bedroom closet door was slightly open. Inside the closet, behind some hanging jackets, was the folding chair from my kitchen, facing outward, like someone had been sitting in there, watching my room. I still think about that sometimes because I honestly don't know when he moved it there. Which means either he did it while I was distracted earlier, or he'd already been inside the house before I went to be.
I was 24 when this happened, back in August of 2022. At the time, I was living alone in a small duplex outside of town while working overnight inventory shifts at a warehouse. My schedule was messed up constantly. I'd sleep during the day, stay awake most nights, and honestly spent too much time online because of it. That's how I met her. Her name online was Leah. At least that's what she called herself. We started talking through Instagram after she replied to a story I posted. At first it was just random stuff. Music, horror movies, complaining about work, normal conversations. She always seemed awake at the same hours I was, which felt weirdly comforting after a while. After maybe 3 weeks, we were talking every day. I remember thinking it was strange how little she shared about herself. She had pictures posted, but they were always slightly blurry or taken from weird angles. No family, no tagged friends. She avoided video calls too, said her phone camera was broken. I noticed all that, but I ignored it because I was lonely, honestly. One Friday night, she told me she was passing through my area because of some issue with a friend she'd been staying with. She asked if she could come over for a little while to charge her phone and rest before getting a ride in the morning. I hesitated longer than I should have, but eventually I gave her my address. She showed up around 11:30 that night. The first thing that threw me off was that she looked older than her pictures. Not dramatically older, maybe mid-30s instead of mid-20s, but enough that I immediately noticed it. The second thing was how she looked at my house before she even looked at me. Not nervous, not shy, just studying it. I remember hearing the gravel crunch under her shoes while she stood near my driveway staring at my windows for a second too long. Then she smiled at me like nothing happened. "Nice place," she said quietly. Her voice sounded flatter in person. I let her inside anyway. At first everything seemed normal enough. I ordered food. We sat in the living room eating takeout while some true crime documentary played in the background. She barely touched her food though. Mostly she just asked questions. What time I usually got home from work. Whether my neighbors were around often. If I had cameras outside. If I lived there alone all the time. Little questions that felt harmless individually but uncomfortable together. I started noticing she'd stare at random parts of the house while I was talking. Hallways. Windows. The back door, like she was memorizing everything. At one point I went into the kitchen to grab drinks, and when I came back, she was standing near the hallway looking at family pictures hanging on the wall. Completely still. I almost laughed because she didn't even react when I walked back in. She just kept staring until I said her name twice. Then she turned around suddenly like I'd interrupted something important. "You look different younger," she said. Something about the way she said it bothered me. Around 1 a.m., I told her she could crash on the couch for a few hours if she wanted before leaving in the morning. She nodded immediately. Too quickly. I remember locking the back door before going into my room because something in my gut felt off by then. Not danger exactly. Just discomfort. Like having a stranger in your house and suddenly realizing they don't feel like a guest anymore. I couldn't sleep much that night. Around maybe 2:40 a.m., I woke up because I heard movement. At first I thought it was the TV. Then I heard my bedroom door creak slightly. Not opening fully. Just enough. I sat up instantly. The hallway light was off, but I could see part of the living room from my bed. She was standing there, not moving. I don't know how long she'd been there before I woke up. I remember my mouth going dry immediately. "Leah," she didn't answer right away. Then she quietly said, "Sorry. I was looking for the bathroom," but the bathroom was on the opposite side of the hallway. And she was facing directly into my room. I said it was fine and shut the door completely after she walked away. After that I locked it. I barely slept. The next morning things got weirder. She acted irritated suddenly. Quiet. Pacing around the kitchen while drinking coffee. I asked if her ride was coming and she just shrugged. Hours passed. Then afternoon came. Every time I hinted that she should probably head out soon, she'd ignore it or change the subject completely. At one point she disappeared into the bathroom for almost 40 minutes. I started getting genuinely uncomfortable. Something felt seriously wrong by then. So while she was in there, I checked my front door camera footage on my phone. That's when my stomach dropped. The footage from the night before showed her arriving earlier than I thought. Way earlier. At 10:47 p.m., almost an hour before she knocked, she was already outside my house. Just standing across the street. Watching, for nearly 50 minutes. Sometimes pacing, sometimes disappearing behind a parked car. Then coming back. I remember staring at my phone, replaying it over and over because it didn't make sense. And then I noticed something else. A second clip from earlier that week, 2 nights before she came over. Same hoodie, same person. Walking slowly past my house around 1 a.m. I genuinely felt cold all over. I hadn't even told her my exact address until the night she visited. At least I didn't think I had. I was still staring at the footage when I heard the bathroom door open behind me. I locked my phone instantly. She was just standing there watching me. Silent. I forced myself to act normal after that because suddenly I didn't want her knowing I was scared. I told her I had work later and needed the place to myself. That's when everything changed. Her expression went completely blank. Not angry at first, just empty. "I thought you said I could stay," she said quietly. "I did, just for the night." She stared at me for a few seconds too long, then she laughed a little under her breath. Not like something was funny. More like she already knew how the conversation would go. I walked toward the front door and opened it. I said, "I think it's time for you to leave." She didn't move. The silence after that felt horrible. Then she suddenly asked, "Who comes here usually?" I remember freezing. "What? Your schedule changes a lot," she said. "Sometimes you leave at night. Sometimes mornings." I never told her that. Not directly. And before I could even process it, she stepped past me and shoved the front door closed hard. The sound echoed through the house. That was the moment fear fully hit me. Real fear. I told her to get out immediately. Her whole personality shifted after that. She started accusing me of using her and lying to her. None of it made sense. She kept talking over me louder and louder while pacing through my living room. Then she grabbed one of the framed pictures off my shelf and threw it at the wall. Glass exploded everywhere. I yelled at her to stop. Instead, she grabbed another one. Then a lamp. She smashed it against the floor so hard the bulb burst. I backed away because I honestly thought she might attack me next. She kept saying weird stuff while destroying things. Things like, "You invited me here, and you don't get to act scared now." I pulled my phone out and told her I was calling the police. The second she heard that, she rushed toward me. Not fully attacking me, but trying to grab the phone. We ended up struggling near the kitchen doorway. I remember slipping on broken glass and slamming into the counter hard enough to bruise my ribs. She scratched my neck trying to reach my phone. I finally shoved her away hard enough that she stumbled backward into one of the chairs. Then I ran outside barefoot holding my phone and locked her inside the house. I know that sounds stupid now, but panic makes you do weird things. I called 911 from outside while standing in my driveway shaking. For a minute everything went completely quiet inside. Too quiet. Then I saw movement through the front window. She was just standing there again, watching me, perfectly still. Police arrived maybe 8 minutes later, but it felt way longer. By the time they entered the house, she was gone. The back door was open. They searched the area but never found her. What bothered me most wasn't even the damage afterward. She'd broken my TV, 2 picture frames, dishes, and cracked part of the drywall near the hallway. It was what the police found outside. Near the side of my house, hidden behind the fence, was a small notebook. Inside were random notes. Descriptions of my car. The times I usually left for work. What lights in my house turned on at night. Even what days my trash bins were outside. Some entries were from before we ever started talking online. I still think about that part constantly, because I never figured out if meeting me online was random, or if she had already been watching me before that.